I still remember the first time I heard about the abandoned chapel on the edge of a small hill town called Kavra. Locals avoided it completely, whispering about unsettling shapes in its windows and lights that flickered despite there being no electricity. One rainy evening, a stray dog wandered near the chapel gates. It barked uncontrollably at something no one else could see. Then, without warning, the sound cut off, as though stolen from its throat. From the darkness of the doorway drifted a tall, shadowy figure. The dog whimpered, rose off the ground as if lifted by invisible hands, and was carried inside. A few moments later, its footsteps echoed faintly from within, only to fall silent. And when it emerged again, its fur had turned pale, its eyes empty, life drained from its body. After that, locals stayed far away. About a week later, I went to Kavra with my college friends for a short break. We were staying in a small inn near the marketplace. On our second night, while most of the group slept, three of us sat up feeling restless. Rafiq complained that the trip felt like a strict school camp, nothing but rules and routines, while Saeem suggested we sneak out to explore. I hesitated, but a few minutes later, we were wandering empty streets under a cool night breeze, the distant sound of crickets filling the air. Eventually, our path curved toward a tall, rusted gate, and behind it stood the chapel. Saeem looked at it with a mix of fascination and mischief. Its cracked walls were heavy with vines, yet there was something oddly inviting about it. I told them to wait for daylight, but they insisted. The heavy gates swung open with a sharp groan. Inside the courtyard, the air smelled of dust and faint metal. Our phone flashlights carved narrow beams through the pitch-black aisles. Cobwebs drooped from wooden beams, and every surface was buried beneath layers of neglect. Suddenly, a frantic flurry of wings burst above us, bats scattering into the night. "This place hasn't seen people in years," I murmured, uneasy. I turned to leave, only to feel something catch my ankle. My heart jumped, but when I aimed the light downward, it was only an old rope tangled around my foot. The others laughed, brushing it off. We explored deeper, admiring faded stained glass long stripped of its color. Then the impossible happened. The hanging bulbs overhead flickered briefly to life before dying again. The building had been abandoned for years. There was no power here. The air grew heavier. We turned back toward the doors, only to find them sealed shut. A dread settled over me. That's when I noticed her. She was standing motionless in the center aisle, a nun in a ripped habit, her face ghost pale, her eyes an unnatural burning red. Saeem asked who she was, but before he could finish, she dissolved into gray smoke. Almost instantly, Rafiq collapsed, his skin marked and raw, his eyes glowing crimson. He began crawling toward us in a jerky, inhuman motion, his features shifting between his own face and hers. We backed into a corner, begging for her to stop. She appeared again, reaching for my wrist, but as soon as her fingers brushed the metal of my faith bracelet, she let out a piercing scream and staggered back. Rafiq immediately dropped to the floor, freed from her control. But it wasn't over. Before we could react, she sprang onto Saeem, claws digging into his neck. Blood slid down his skin as she leaned in, dragging her tongue across it with disturbing slowness. My fear transformed into instinct. I tore the bracelet from my wrist, drew the small ceremonial blade my father had given me, and shouted a firm prayer from my heart. "You will not harm us. Leave this place now." I pressed the bracelet to her hand and plunged the blade into her chest. A thick black substance oozed from her as she shrieked in agony. I staggered to the altar, collapsing before an old statue of Christ. I wasn't Christian, but I spoke quietly. "If this is your house, protect it from this darkness." Then something incredible happened. The chapel blazed with light. From a side door came an elderly priest, followed by two nuns. They moved to Saim and Rafiq, resting their hands gently on their foreheads and reciting blessings. The priest approached the writhing nun, sprinkling her with holy water. A cloud of black smoke erupted from her body and streamed upward into the statue as though it was taking her in. The priest turned to me and said softly, "Her soul was trapped in pain for many years. Tonight, you helped her find release. Your friends will wake with no memory of this, and you should never speak of it." The next thing I knew, we were outside, the cool night air chilling my face as we walked silently back to the inn. In daylight, everything felt unreal, as if it had been a dream. But later that day, when we passed the road to the chapel, I stopped dead. There was nothing there. No gate, no ruins. Just empty earth. In the distance, I saw the priest once more, smiling faintly as he scattered water into the air. Over time, the memory grew hazy, almost like it was fading away. But the people of Kavra never forgot. They still whisper about the night an old curse was broken, and the spirit of the evil nun was finally set free.
I once knew a girl named Alina. She grew up in a family that had nothing. Not much food, no comforts, and no kindness. Her mother passed away when she was just a small child, barely 8 years old. At home it was just her younger brother Daniel, and their father. But their father was a broken man. Most nights he came home drunk, and some nights his anger turned violent. Alina often took the brunt of it. One night, after things got worse than ever, she decided she couldn't let her brother grow up in that house. Without telling anyone, she grabbed Daniel's hand and the two of them ran. They left their town of Armandale behind and boarded a bus to a city they had never seen before. When they arrived, they had no place to go and no idea what to do. They ended up sitting on the stone steps outside a small, old church, hoping people passing by might give them a little money for food. After a while, a woman in a long coat stopped and spoke to them. She could see they were hungry and scared. Alina told her everything about their mother, their father, and the way they'd left. The woman listened quietly and then said they could stay at the church for a while. From that day, the church became their shelter. Daniel was enrolled in the church-run school, and Alina began helping in the prayer groups. Over time, she seemed devoted to the place. She even decided to become a nun, dedicating her life to faith and service. But not long after she took her vows, strange things began happening to her, things none of us at the church had ever seen before. One night, while she slept in her quarters, loud, panicked screams woke the other nuns. We rushed in and found Alina's body locked stiff, her eyes rolled completely white. She was thrashing as if being beaten, but there was no one touching her. And her voice? It wasn't her own anymore. It was deep, guttural, and unmistakably male. One of the older sisters sprinkled holy water over her, and immediately a thin smoke began to rise from her skin. Her body went limp, she calmed, but the peace didn't last long. From that night onward, Alina's health began to slip. Her habits changed completely. She stopped attending regular prayers and instead wandered the halls at odd hours. Some nights, she would laugh to herself in an empty corridor. On others, strange, deep noises would echo from her room. And sometimes the sounds were not human at all, sharp, animal-like roars. It became impossible to deny the truth. Alina was possessed. Preparations for an exorcism were quietly started, but before the date was set, something terrifying happened. A sister went to check on Alina late one evening and found her missing from her bed. Then a strange rustling sound came from one corner of the room. Alina was standing against the wall in a long black gown, the kind traditionally worn in mourning. Blood ran slowly from the corner of her mouth. Low, threatening growls poured from her throat. Before the nun could move, Alina lunged at her with shocking speed. Others heard the commotion and rushed in. The room filled with chaos, Alina's wild movement shaking the furniture, her voice shifting between screams and inhuman snarls. Suddenly, she tried to climb through the open window as if to escape, but lost her footing. She survived the fall, but the damage to her spine left her unable to walk again. Oddly, after that night, the exorcism went forward with less resistance, almost as if the injury had weakened whatever was inside her. But the possession didn't disappear. The priests decided they needed to understand why she had been targeted so fiercely. Alina was moved to the church's small hospital wing. During prayer sessions, she was placed under hypnosis so the priests could speak to whatever was controlling her. Alongside this, a small investigative team dug into her past. What they discovered chilled all of us. Her mother, they learned, had once been involved in a cult that practiced dark rituals and devil worship. Since she was a baby, certain ceremonies had been performed on her, offerings to something not human. They were meant to prepare her body for the spirit they served. Her father, realizing what was being done, had tried to pull her away from those practices, but he acted too late. By the age of 4, Alina reportedly began speaking in a strange, old language no one in her family recognized. Her facial expressions sometimes shifted into something unchildlike, unnatural. She even once told her father that his death would bring a special arrival, a full awakening of what was inside her. Soon after her mother's own ritual went wrong, she died. The cult turned its back on Alina. The investigators eventually linked Alina's escape from her hometown to a horrible secret. She had, in fact, poisoned her father's drink before running away with Daniel. It wasn't just an escape. It was the moment the possession took hold completely. The priests also found something alarming. Daniel, her younger brother, had strange burn-like marks along his spine and arms, symbols matching those in the cult's old books. It seemed he too had been chosen for similar rituals, and he had been carrying the mark of that same darkness without knowing it. The authorities became involved, charging Alina with multiple crimes, but her health was already failing rapidly. In her final days, she seemed calm, almost relieved. Then, one gray morning, she died quietly in her sleep. The church buried her in the courtyard and took full responsibility for Daniel, vowing to keep him safe. Still, even after her death, the priests continued to hold prayers for Alina. People said that during those services, the air in the chapel would turn ice cold for a few moments, as though someone, unseen, had entered. Some of the sisters believe that even now she wanders somewhere between two worlds, not entirely free and not entirely gone.
I will never forget the story of what happened inside the old monastery on the edge of Carlinton. It began on a bleak, stormy evening. 2 nuns stood at the heavy oak doors, knowing they had no choice but to go inside. One of them turned to the other and whispered, "If we don't stop this tonight, no one out there will survive." The words felt heavy, like a final goodbye. They pushed the creaking doors open and stepped into the dim, candlelit hall. Waiting for them was a figure so disturbing that my blood ran cold when I first heard her described. A tall, twisted nun with burning eyes and a face locked in a cruel, mocking grin. Her name was Valera, a name whispered in fear. But before she could reach them, one of the sisters suddenly bolted, fled into the shadows, and took her own life rather than fall into Valera's hands. When news of the tragedy reached the high priest of a great church in Romania, he knew this was no ordinary death. He decided to investigate and brought with him Sister Evelyn, a young nun with an unusual gift. Evelyn saw visions. She sometimes caught glimpses of spirits others could not see. The priest believed that gift might be the key to surviving what lay inside. They arrived at night. The monastery's walls loomed above them like stone skeletons, long abandoned but not truly empty. From the moment they crossed the threshold, unease began to grow. Far down the ruined corridors, they saw figures drifting past in white robes, monks, silent and faceless. As they moved deeper, the air thickened, and objects shifted on their own as if pushed by invisible hands. In one cold, shadowed corner, the priest stopped suddenly. Before him stood the nun who had taken her own life, her head bent at an unnatural angle, half her face shattered. Without warning, her eyes flew open and she lunged. The next moment, the priest was gone, trapped inside a coffin, surrounded by hissing snakes. Sister Evelyn ran, heart hammering, until she collided with another nun. This one's face was pale but kind, her voice soft as she explained the truth. Many years ago, an exorcism here had gone horribly wrong, opening a portal between our world and something darker. Through that tear came demons, and among them was one of the most powerful, Valera. Her hatred was pure and simple. She destroyed anyone who served God. Evelyn didn't waste time. She demanded, "Tell me how to stop her." The nun trembled before speaking. Only one thing can end her: the blood of Christ himself. It lies sealed in a sacred relic, locked away with a key. Slowly, she pressed the old iron key into Evelyn's hand. The moment Evelyn touched it, a jolt of cold shot up her arm, and her mind was filled with the image of a coffin and the priest trapped inside. Following the vision, Evelyn found the priest and freed him. She told him about the relic and how to use it, repeating the words of the nun she had met. The priest froze. "Evelyn, no one has lived here for decades. This place is deserted." The realization hit them both. The nun who helped Evelyn was not alive. She had been speaking to a spirit sent to guide her. They searched until they found the hidden chamber. There, behind a heavy stone altar, lay the relic, a small vessel covered in symbols, said to hold drops of holy blood. But before they could use it, Valera appeared. She struck without hesitation. Her power was overwhelming, and the priest never stood a chance. His body went still in moments. Evelyn was alone now. Valera advanced slowly, the air around her rippling with heat and malice. Evelyn backed toward the altar, her hands searching desperately. Her fingers found the relic. She ripped it open, and the warm, metallic scent of ancient blood filled the air. With trembling hands, she flung it toward the demon. The drops struck Valera's face and habit. Instantly, her mocking expression twisted into pain. A guttural scream tore from her throat. Her form writhed and convulsed, the darkness around her shattering like glass. And then, in one breath, she was gone, the hall falling silent as though nothing had ever happened. What remained was the echo of those screams and the knowledge that sometimes, in places touched by deep shadows, the line between the living and the dead disappears.